Snow had come early that year, and it hadn't taken the courtesy to leave. It clung to the earth like grief, quiet, stubborn, and cold to the touch. The wind slid across the prairie in low sighs, brushing against the shuttered windows of Elias Granger's homestead with fingers like old regret. He moved through his morning like he always did, coffee boiled black over the stove, a splash of it poured into a chipped cup, the rest left to steam beside an untouched second mug. The house was clean in a way that felt empty, not tidy. No voices echoed off the timber walls. Just the steady creak of boots and the hush of a man who didn't ask much from a day. Elias had once been a man with purpose, a husband, a soon-to-be father. But that was before the winter storm 5 years ago, the one that closed the roads and sealed the doctor away in town while his wife lay laboring through her last night on earth. The child never cried. Neither did he, not then. But something inside him had hollowed, and he hadn't tried to fill it since. By the time the noon sun slanted pale through the windows, Elias had already mended a fence and seen to the livestock. He moved slow, steady, each task a small weight that kept his hands from remembering how empty they were. He didn't notice the footprints in the snow behind the barn until later, when the chickens stirred uneasy and the dog barked once, low and uncertain. He followed the sound, hand resting near the handle of his rifle, but not drawing it. He wasn't quick to assume trouble. Trouble usually announced itself louder. The barn door groaned as he pushed it open, and the cold breathed out from the shadows. At first, he thought it was a pile of old cloths scattered near the haystack. But then the shape moved. She was curled against the stall wall, wrapped in torn skirts and a threadbare shawl. Her face was pale as wax, her lips cracked and blue at the edges. One arm was curled around her belly, round, swollen, unmistakable. The other hand gripped a rusted pitchfork like a dying prayer. He didn't speak. Not yet. She blinked up at him with the wide-eyed terror of a deer cornered in a field. When she tried to sit up, her body failed her, and she slumped back, breath rasping like wind through reeds. "You're safe," he said quietly, voice rough from disuse. "Ain't no one here but me." Her eyes darted to the open door behind him, then back to his face. She didn't answer, just held his gaze like a dare. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "I won't hurt you," he added, though he figured those words had been said too many times by men who didn't mean them. He crouched and reached toward her, offering his coat. She flinched. But then the cold made its argument clearer than any words could. After a long moment, she let him wrap the coat around her shoulders, and her head dropped forward like it was too heavy to hold. He gathered her into his arms carefully, like lifting something fragile left out in the frost. She was light, too light. Her skin burned through the layers with fever or hunger, or both. He carried her across the snow, with boots crunching slow and sure beneath them, her breath shallow against his chest. Inside, he stoked the fire until it glowed like an ember heart, then set her down on the old settee near it. She barely stirred, only moaned once, soft as a lost him. He brought water. She couldn't lift the cup, so he tilted it to her lips. She drank, eyes never leaving his face, not with trust, but with exhausted wariness, like a bird too tired to fly, but still watching the sky. He fetched blankets, left food where she could see it, then retreated across the room, giving her the space he guessed she hadn't been given in a long while. Outside, the wind had picked up, pressing snow against the windows like a restless spirit seeking a way in. She slept in fits. He could hear her murmuring through the night, whispers caught between dreams and fever. Names maybe, please, or just memories trying to claw their way out. He didn't sleep much. Sat by the fire sharpening his knife, watching the flames stretch and curl like dancers in red silk. From time to time, he'd glance her way, not to stare, just to make sure she was still breathing. In the pale light of morning, she stirred again. This time with a start, like waking in a world she hadn't meant to enter. Her hands went immediately to her stomach, and then to her surroundings. She tried to rise, legs wobbling, fear rising like a tide. "Wait," he said softly, holding out a hand but not reaching. "You're not trapped. You're not chased. You're just here." She froze mid-motion, looked at him like she was trying to decide if he was real. "I ain't got much," he continued, "but what I have's yours until you're strong enough to walk away. You can leave. Or you can rest. Either way, I'll not bother you." Her throat worked like she wanted to speak, but hadn't used the muscles in too long. "I'm Elias," he offered, filling the quiet. "Granger. Just me here since." He stopped. Didn't finish. Let the words die like they often did. She looked around the room then. Her eyes paused on the second coffee mug, still sitting cold and untouched from the morning before. Then she nodded once. Just once. But it felt like a door creaked open on its hinges. He turned back toward the fire and didn't press her for more. Didn't ask her name. Didn't ask about the baby or where she'd come from. If she wanted to tell him, she would. If not, that was hers to keep. He heard the soft rustle of blankets as she adjusted, heard her settle more deeply into the couch. A tentative surrender. Outside, the wind had calmed. The storm had passed for now. But inside that house, something new had begun to take root, uncertain, unspoken, and flickering like flame light on old wood. Elias didn't know what she would be to him. Didn't know if she would stay, or if the thaw would carry her off like so many other things the world had taken. But for now, there was breath in the room that wasn't his. And in a house built from silence, that alone felt like the start of something. And so he let the fire burn low and waited for morning. As the snow finally softened against the windows, and the ghosts in the barn gave way to the sound of a woman sleeping, warm at last. The days that followed fell into a rhythm, quiet as snow melt and just as slow. She stayed in the house, never straying beyond the porch, watching the land as if expecting it to rise up and swallow her whole. Her presence was light, careful, like a ghost uncertain if she was welcome in the world of the living. Elias didn't speak unless he had to. He gave her space, but not distance. Left warm bread on the table, stew simmering on the stove. Repaired her shawl without a word, sewing each stitch with the same care he gave his fence posts. She never thanked him, but once he caught her fingers lingering over the new seams. That was enough. She moved like someone trained to be invisible, steps light, gaze always scanning the doorways, shoulders tense like a question with no answer. Her hair, once tangled with burrs and dirt, he noticed, had been combed, tied back with a piece of twine. Her face, though gaunt, had started to show color again. He'd ask simple things. Did she want more food? Did she need anything from town? She'd nod or shake her head. Nothing more. But her eyes held thunder and old pain, like someone who had been screaming inside for years. Once, he came in from the barn and found her near the hearth, arms wrapped around her belly. She wasn't crying, but there was a stillness to her, like a lake just before it freezes. "I can't stay long," she murmured, the word scratchy with disuse. He didn't answer right away, just took off his coat and hung it by the fire. "Then stay as long as you need." She looked at him then, truly looked, as if trying to see what lay beneath the quiet. Whatever she saw, it made her stay a little longer that day, and the day after that. By the end of the week, she'd started setting the table before he came in from chores, folding the napkins with delicate precision. Once he watched her run her hand along the edge of a teacup, as if it reminded her of something gentler, somewhere else. Her hands were skilled, the kind that had once done fine work, not ranch work, not survival. He found himself wondering about her story, but never asked. She seemed like someone who'd been asked too many questions with fists instead of words. One afternoon, he came in from the fields early. The wind had picked up, chasing sharp gusts across the plains. Inside, the house was warm, smelled of stew again, this time with a hint of herbs he didn't recall owning. She was at the stove, back to him. He paused in the doorway, not wanting to startle her. She turned, eyes wide. Then, seeing it was him, she relaxed. A fraction. "I used to cook for a house with 20 mouths," she said softly. "This feels strange. Quiet." "Quiet suits me," Elias replied. "But I don't mind the smell of rosemary." Something about that made her smile. Just barely. But it was the kind of smile that came from remembering who you used to be. That night, the snow came again. Not heavy, but steady. She stood by the window, watching it fall. He brought her a blanket and sat near the fire, not too close. She didn't turn from the window. "My name's Ayana," she said finally, voice so soft it almost got lost in the crackle of flame. Elias didn't move. "Ayana," he repeated, letting it settle between them like something sacred. "That's a good name." She didn't tell him more. Not then. But it was the first brick in a wall being taken down. Days passed, and spring crept closer. The snow began to recede in patches, revealing mud and dead grass beneath. He caught her outside once, sitting on the porch steps, face tilted toward the weak sun. The wind played with her skirts. Her hands rested on her belly, as if the child inside had stirred, reminding her he, or she, was still coming, no matter what the world did. "I didn't think we'd make it this far," she said, not looking at him. "You have," Elias said. "You're here." She turned to him slowly. "For now." He didn't press, just nodded. That evening, she left a folded shirt on his chair, his mended neatly at the sleeve. She'd sewn it without asking. He put it on the next day without comment. One morning, she woke in a sweat, hand clutched to her side. He heard her from the next room. Came running, heart thudding. She waved him off, pale and shaking. "It's just the baby," she said, breathless. Stretching. "Feels like she's fighting." "She?" Elias asked gently. She touched her belly with something like awe. "It's just a feeling." He brought her water, sat beside the bed until her breathing evened. "Wherever she ends up," Ayana whispered, eyes barely open, "I hope it's somewhere quiet. Somewhere kind." Elias watched her drift off, wondering if she knew she'd already found such a place. Later that week, while he was tending the animals, she came to the barn. First time. Stood in the doorway, like someone crossing into a memory. He looked up, surprised but careful not to show it. "I've never seen a man talk to his horse like that," she said. Elias gave a quiet shrug. "Animals listen better than most folks." She stepped inside, resting a hand on a post. Her fingers traced the grain of the wood. "This barn saved my life." He looked around, as if seeing it fresh. It'd seen death too. Long time ago. She turned her face toward him. "Your wife." He nodded once. "And the boy." Neither of them made it. The silence after was thick, but not heavy. "I'm sorry," she said. "Wasn't your fault." "I know." They stood like that for a while, two people tied together not by blood or fate, but by the soft, stubborn will to keep breathing after everything else has gone quiet. That night, she sat at the fire again. A soft storm tapped at the windows. Elias poured her a mug of tea, handed it over. She didn't flinch this time. "I left a man," she said. "Not the father. Just the last one who thought he could own me." Elias didn't react. Just let her speak. He said no one else would take me in. That a woman carrying someone else's burden ought to be grateful. She stared into the tea. He was wrong. But it took me too long to know it. "You were never the burden," Elias said simply. She looked up at him. Her eyes filled with something sharp, like grief laced with gratitude. He didn't break the gaze. Didn't offer to fix it, or her. Just let the words hang there between them. After a long moment, she set the mug down. "I think I'll stay a little longer." "All right. I can't promise much." "Don't need much." She smiled again, fuller this time. Then leaned back, watching the fire with new steadiness. Outside, the wind began to calm. Inside, the air between them softened, thick with the kind of silence that heals rather than harms. And though neither said it aloud, something had shifted. Not enough to call it hope. Not yet. But perhaps the start of it. A seed nestled deep beneath the snow, waiting for spring. The land was beginning to breathe again. The snow didn't vanish all at once. It retreated slowly, curling back into the shadowed hollows and fence corners like it had grown tired of staying. Shoots of green pushed through the thawed earth, tentative and brave. The wind softened its voice. Birds returned in pairs, calling out from the eaves like they remembered how to belong here. Inside the house, a different thaw was taking place. Ayana moved with more certainty now. Her limbs no longer trembled beneath the weight of the child inside her. Her face, though still thin, had the glow of someone fed, rested, seen. She'd begun humming while she worked, quiet little threads of tune that disappeared as soon as Elias entered the room, like she was still unsure whether joy was something she was allowed to claim out loud. Elias noticed everything. He noticed how she folded laundry with careful corners, how she stopped to smell the soap when washing dishes, how she paused each morning at the window, tracing the horizon with her eyes like she was searching for ghosts. He never asked about her past again, but she started telling him anyway, not all at once, but in pieces scattered across days like breadcrumbs. Her father had died when she was small. Her mother, hard-handed and God-fearing, had remarried a man who didn't like noise or hunger or girls with minds of their own. Ayanna had learned to be small, silent, agreeable. When she turned 16, the preacher's wife took her in, taught her embroidery, how to boil down nettles for tea, how to stand up straight even when her heart caved in. That woman died 3 winters later, and Ayanna was passed along again, like a borrowed pot or a stray dog. "I was always something someone tolerated," she said one night, sewing by the fire. "Never something someone chose." Elias looked up from the boot he was mending. "That's a cruel way to live." She didn't argue. In return, Elias told her about the orchard he once planned to build for his wife. Rows of apple trees behind the barn, so she could pick fruit with the baby on her hip and flower on her cheek. He'd dug 6 holes before the storm came. Now they were just small sunken circles in the earth, half forgotten. She listened, eyes soft. "Did you name the boy?" He nodded. "Matthew." "Mine might be a girl," she said, "but I think I'll wait until I see her face." He smiled at that. A real one. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, less weathered by sorrow. The next morning, she was sitting by the hearth, fingers resting lightly on her belly. She looked up at Elias and asked without ceremony, "Do you believe people can change?" He thought for a while before answering. "I think some people were always good, just got buried under too much hurt." Ayanna nodded. Maybe that's true. She started coming with him to the barn, feeding the hens, brushing down the mare. He showed her how to check the fencing, how to lift a shovel without straining. She learned quickly, with quiet determination. One day, she returned from the garden with her skirts dusted in dirt and cheeks flushed from bending in the sun. Elias had never seen her look more alive. Later, he found her sitting on the porch steps, rubbing her lower back. "She's heavy today," Ayanna said, smiling faintly. "She's strong," Elias said, taking a seat beside her. They sat in silence, watching the sky blush gold at the edges. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment, she leaned her head against his shoulder. Not a deification, not a promise. Just a small gesture of trust. He didn't move. That night, he took the wood he'd been storing in the shed and began building a cradle. He didn't tell her. Worked on it in the barn under lamplight, sanding each edge smooth, fitting the joints with more care than he'd given anything in years. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe because his hands needed something to offer. Maybe because her child was becoming a quiet part of his days. Maybe because he'd begun imagining the sound of a baby's cry in the house, and it no longer frightened him. One morning, Ayanna found him hunched over the half-finished cradle. She stood in the doorway, without speaking, arms crossed loosely over her chest. He looked up, sheepish. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's solid." Ayanna walked in, fingers trailing along the curve of the wood. Her throat moved like she was swallowing something heavy. "No one's ever made anything for me before," she said. Elias looked away. "It's not just for you." "I know," she whispered. Spring poured in slow, filling the house with new light. The curtains fluttered like breath. The old boards creaked differently now, as if shifting to make room for what was coming. Sometimes Ayanna would wake from dreams, startled and breathless. Elias heard her through the wall. He never went to her room, never pried. But the next morning, her tea would be waiting. A slice of bread thick, with honey, beside it. She never asked how he knew, but she always ate. One afternoon, the clouds rolled in thick and low. The air turned metallic. Elias was out back, pulling feed sacks into the shed when he saw Ayanna sitting in a rocking chair, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding a folded piece of paper. She didn't see him watching. Later that evening, by the fire, she handed him the note. "I started writing letters," she said. "Not to anyone really. Just to the parts of me that need to hear things." He took the paper carefully. Didn't open it. Just nodded. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said. "Not really." "You are," Elias replied. "And not just here. With me." Ayana's eyes shone. Not with tears. With something steadier. Stronger. That night, they didn't speak much. Just sat beside each other while the storm tapped gently at the windows, and the hearth crackled warm between them. The baby kicked once, strong enough to make Ayana laugh out loud. Elias looked over in surprise and found himself smiling without meaning to. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't say the things he'd begun to feel, but he stayed beside her, breathing in the scent of lavender and wood smoke, watching the fire flicker across the cradle they'd both come to believe in. Outside, the trees swayed and sighed. Inside, two lives leaned quietly toward each other, neither needing to be rescued, only seen. And just beneath the silence, something sacred stirred, waiting, patient, ready to bloom. The knock came just after midday, when the sun was high and mean, and Ayana was shelling peas by the open window. Elias was outside, mending the gate where the hinge had rusted through. The sound was sharp, 3 crisp raps against the wood, like a judge calling court. Ayana stilled. The pea fell from her fingers and rolled across the floor. She hadn't heard a knock in weeks. Folks didn't come out this far unless they meant something. She stood slowly, hands brushing over her belly, as if the baby might still the world with her. The door creaked as she opened it. A man stood on the porch, dust-covered and lean, his hat tilted back just enough to show a crooked smile beneath mean eyes. "Well, B," he drawled, eyes sweeping over her like a brand. "Didn't expect you'd land so soft." Ayana didn't speak, her body locked up like a door bolted tight. Elias came around the corner then, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw the man. He moved to Ayana's side without a word. The stranger gave a lopsided grin. "Name's Roy Dalton. I'm here for what's mine." Ayana flinched. Elias didn't. "She's not yours," Elias said, voice low. Roy's eyes flicked between them. "She's carrying my blood. Left without a word in the middle of the night, like some thief. That child's mine, and I aim to take her back." Ayana's voice came sharp, brittle. "You left me to rot, Roy. That child isn't yours. You said as much." He smirked. "Didn't say I wanted it, no. But the law might see things different. Pregnant girl running cross-country alone. Sounds suspicious to most folks." Elias stepped forward. Not aggressive, just steady. "This land's mine. This house is mine. The sheriff knows it. You want trouble, you'll find it. Otherwise, turn around and keep riding." Roy stared a moment longer, then spat off the side of the porch. "This ain't over. She don't belong here." Ayana raised her chin. "You're right. I belong nowhere that forgets I'm human." Roy laughed once, bitter and loud. "Heard you were staying with a preacher's widow. Guess she didn't teach you humility." "She taught me not to mistake cruelty for strength," Ayana said. Roy's grin faltered just slightly. He tipped his hat, mockery gleaming in every movement. "We'll see how long this fairy tale lasts. Wind always changes." He turned and strode back to his horse, boots kicking up dust. Rode off slow, like a man who wanted to be remembered. Elias waited until the sound of hooves faded. Then he looked to Ayana, who was staring at the road like she could burn it into ash with her eyes. "You all right?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't think I've ever been so afraid and so sure at the same time." "He can't hurt you here," Elias said. "But he can try." Her voice broke, not from fear, but fury. They didn't sleep that night. Ayana kept to the rocking chair by the fire, arms wrapped around her belly. Elias sat across from her, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate care. The sound of metal and cloth filled the space between them. "I thought I was done running," Ayana said into the quiet. "I thought I could stop flinching at shadows." "You can," Elias replied. "It just takes time." The next morning, Sheriff McCall rode up the lane. A broad man with a weathered face and a heart slower than most, but solid. He stepped off his horse with a frown. Heard Roy Dalton was poking around, he said. Says you're harboring his wife. I'm not his anything, Ayanna said, stepping outside before Elias could respond. Miracl nodded once, respectful. You say that plain enough, and I'll write it up just so. I say it plain. I say it under oath. That man never laid a finger in kindness. Only in ownership. He's no father, no husband, just a bitter man who doesn't like being told no. Elias watched the sheriff carefully. He knew the kind of men the law sometimes bent toward. But Miracl just sighed. Far as I'm concerned, this land is Granger's. You're staying here of your own will. Ain't a court west of the river would say otherwise. Then we're done here, Elias said. Almost. Miracl glanced toward Ayanna. You want me to have a deputy keep watch for a spell? She hesitated, then shook her head. If he comes back, I'd rather see it with my own eyes. The sheriff tipped his hat. You're brave, miss. No, she said softly. I'm tired. That night, Elias sat beside her again, the fire flickering low. He wanted to reach for her hand, to say something that could chase away the past like smoke. But instead, he said the only thing that mattered. If he comes back, I won't let him near you. Ayanna turned to him, eyes shining, not with tears, but with something clearer. I believe you, she said. Days passed. Roy didn't return, but the fear lingered like smoke in the corners of the room. Ayanna jumped at sudden noises, slept light, but slowly she began to root herself again, into the land, into the house, into him. One morning, she came in from the barn with a full pail of milk and mud on her boots. She was smiling. I felt her hiccup, she said, laughter spilling into the room, like she's already arguing with the world. Elias grinned. She gets that honest. That night, the sky cracked open with a storm. Lightning lit the horizon in jagged bursts. Thunder rolled low and deep. Ayanna couldn't sleep. She wandered the house like a woman searching for something that wasn't lost anymore. She ended up in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, the other on her belly. Elias came in quietly, offered her tea. I was afraid he'd take this away, she said. Not just the baby. All of it. The porch. The cradle. You. He can't, Elias said. Because you're not his to take. She looked up then, and for the first time, she saw not the widower who kept the shadows, but a man standing firm in the light of something he hadn't dared believe in for years. Neither are you, she whispered. Elias tilted his head. What do you mean? She stepped closer. You don't belong to your grief anymore. You don't have to. And just like that, something broke open between them, quiet and fierce. Not a kiss. Not even a touch. Just two people standing in the middle of a storm, finally seeing the shelter they'd built in each other. Outside, the thunder rumbled on. But inside, the air had changed. The wind might still turn, but they were no longer bracing for it alone. The labor began in the deepest part of night, when the wind outside had stilled and even the wolves had gone quiet. Ayanna woke with a sharp cry caught in her throat, the kind that wasn't fear, but the body's ancient memory flaring to life. Pain radiated low and deep, twisting her from sleep into something new and primal. The fire had burned down to embers. She sat upright, hand clutching her belly. Another wave came, and she pressed her teeth together until it passed, breathing hard into the darkness. Elias heard her before she called. He was already rising, already pulling on boots, moving toward her room with a steadiness that steadied her. She looked up as he stepped inside, face shadowed but calm. It's time, she whispered. He only nodded. Let's get you to the fire. She leaned on him as they crossed the room. No shame, no hesitation. Every step was harder than the last, her breath hitching, the pain coming faster now, a drumbeat rising from the ground. He helped her into the old rocking chair, the one she'd claimed months ago, the one that had waited longer than either of them had known. The fire roared again by his hand, coaxed to life with practiced fingers. He laid out towels, boiled water. He didn't speak unless she needed him to. He didn't hover. He simply stayed, solid and sure, like a tree that would not fall. Outside, snow had started again, fine, glittering flakes in the darkness, as if the sky wanted to bless the moment without disturbing it. Ayana labored through the night, with grit carved from years of surviving things worse than this. But this was still hard, harder than she'd imagined. She screamed once, wild and sharp, and Elias came to her side without flinching, hand resting on her shoulder. Not to hold her still, just to say, "I'm here." "I'm scared," she breathed. "Not of the pain. Of what comes after." He met her eyes. "You've already walked through worse. And you're still here." Tears spilled from her, sudden and clean. Not from sorrow, but the terrible, beautiful weight of being believed in. The final hours blurred. Blood, sweat, breath, the scent of iron and smoke. Her body fought and yielded and fought again. And when dawn cracked the sky open with its first blue light, when the snow lit gold in the rising sun, the child came. A girl, small, damp with life, red-faced and furious. Ayana wept like the land does after a long drought, helplessly and without shame. She held the baby to her chest, skin to skin, tears soaking the crown of dark hair. Elias knelt beside her, breath caught in his chest, watching with awe that didn't need words. He hadn't touched the child, hadn't yet asked to, but his eyes were full. "She's strong," Ayana whispered. "She came roaring." "She gets that from her mother," Elias said softly. Ayana looked at him then, exhaustion and love and wonder braided into her face. "Do you want to hold her?" He hesitated, as if afraid he'd shatter the moment just by moving. But she nodded, already lifting the child toward him. His hands were gentle, cradling her like something sacred. The child blinked at him, scrunching her face into something close to fury, then settled with a sigh. He rocked slowly, rhythm drawn from some memory he hadn't known he'd kept. "She's heavier than she looks," he murmured. "She's made of everything I couldn't say," Ayana replied. When he handed her back, he didn't let go right away. His fingers lingered a moment too long. Not possessive, just reluctant. Later that day, Ayana slept, curled with the baby on her chest, breathing deep. Her body was wrung out, but her face was soft, and the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Elias stepped out onto the porch, the wind brushing his face like a friend come home. He looked out over the land, bare trees, fields wet with thaw, sky streaked with the early blush of spring. And he thought of all the years he'd spent waiting for something he couldn't name. He didn't hear the rider until the horse was nearly at the gate. Roy. He hadn't come with a lawman, hadn't come with paperwork or argument, just a pistol at his hip and the stink of a man with nothing left to lose. Elias stepped down from a porch before Roy could dismount. Their eyes met and time bent. "She had the baby," Roy said, voice flat. "I came to see what's mine." "She's not yours," Elias said. His voice was steady, final. Roy dismounted slowly, letting his hand rest near the pistol grip. "You think she'd pick you? Some dried-up farmer hiding in the hills?" "She didn't pick me. She chose peace." Roy laughed, bitter and empty. "You think peace lasts? You think she won't need more than what you are?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. Roy stepped closer, hand twitching. Elias's shotgun was in the crook of his arm, the way a man might carry a cane or a shovel. He didn't raise it, just stood his ground. Inside, Ayana stirred. She came to the doorway, the baby wrapped against her chest. Her eyes locked on Roy. "No more," she said, voice loud enough to cut the wind. "You don't get to haunt me." Roy faltered. Just a flicker, but it was there. A crack. "She's mine by blood," he said. "You didn't bleed for her," Ayana replied. "You didn't ache and stretch and break. You didn't stay up through storms or kneel at the cradle. You didn't wait or wonder or love." Roy looked at Elias. "And he did." "No," she said. "He didn't love me out loud. But he saw me. He stayed. That's more than you ever did." Roy's eyes dropped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without ceremony, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. No threat, no fight, just a man who'd finally realized he had no power left. Ayana leaned against the doorway, trembling. Elias went to her side. For the first time, he reached for her hand. She took it, and in that quiet, snow-blushed morning, they stood as three, a mother, a child, and a man who had once lost everything and found, in return, a life no longer marked by silence, but by choice. Later, when the fire had been stoked again and the sun had climbed fully into the sky, Iana sat beside Elias with a baby sleeping in her arms. The cradle he built waited nearby, half in shadow, half in light. "You never asked what her name was," Iana said. "I figured you'd tell me when it was time." She smiled. "Her name is Hope." He nodded slowly. "That's a good name." They sat that way for a long while, saying nothing more. Because sometimes the truth didn't need telling. It just needed living. And in the quiet of that cabin, with a firelight dancing and a new day laid out before them, hope wasn't a word anymore. It was a breath, a bond, a beginning. And it had come roaring into the world. The desert bled under the dying sun, its jagged rocks casting long, broken shadows. Heat shimmered off the ground like ghost fires, and above, the vultures circled, silent, patient, cruel. Tayan staggered through the dust, one hand pressed tight against the gunshot wound in her side. Blood trickled down her fingers, warm first, now chilling as it clotted in the cooling evening air. Each breath came harder than the last. She tasted iron on her tongue, grit between her teeth. Her moccasins scraped against the rocks, worn thin from days of walking, of hoping, of believing she could forge peace between her people and the settlers. A fool's hope, she realized now. Behind her, the trail of blood was easy to follow. They had made sure of that, Jared Price and his men. Men she had broken bread with, who had nodded and smiled across the firelight, who had taken her words of trust and twisted them like a knife in her back. They had promised a meeting, a treaty. Instead, they had greeted her with rifle fire, each bullet a punctuation mark on their hatred. Tayan's legs gave out, sending her crumpling to her knees. The earth met her hard, driving a grunt from her lips. The world tilted, spun. She clenched her jaw and forced herself upright. No time to die. Not yet. The spirits of her ancestors whispered on the wind, urging her forward. The horizon blurred ahead of her, a wavering line of cliffs and dry canyons. Safety, maybe, or a quicker death. A memory surfaced unbidden, the way the settlers had looked at her when she first arrived at their town, half curiosity, half suspicion. She remembered teaching their children words in Apache, remembered laughing with the women over fire pits, sharing corn and beans, tales and songs. It had felt like a bridge. It had felt real. But when livestock went missing, when the river dried up, when the old fears slithered back into the settlers' hearts, it had been easy to blame the outsider with copper skin and dark eyes. Easier still to believe she was a spy, a snake among them. Fear made monsters of men. A snarl of pain tore from her throat as she pushed on, dragging her body toward a cleft in the rock wall up ahead. Shelter, if she could reach it. Each step cost her more than the last. Her vision tunneled, black creeping in from the edges. Above, the vultures tightened their circle. The ground gave way to loose shale underfoot. Tayan slipped, caught herself with a gasp. Her fingers scraped raw against stone. Every heartbeat pounded against the bullet wound, sending shock waves of agony through her frame. Another memory stabbed at her. The settlers' faces after the shooting, calm and hard, not even the decency to look away as she fell. Price had leaned down and whispered in her ear, a mockery of a farewell. Should have known better, Apache girl. Can't tame a wild thing. A howl rose from the distant hills, coyotes, eager for the feast. Tayan forced her body forward, inch by inch, blood darkening the ground behind her. She found the narrow opening of a crevice and squeezed into it, the stone cool against her fevered skin. She collapsed against the back wall, gasping. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke and sagebrush. In the distance, dust trails marked riders still searching, still hunting. Settlers who wouldn't rest until her body fed the vultures. Her vision blurred again. She shook her head to clear it, but her body refused to obey. Darkness crowded the edges of her mind. Through the haze, she became aware of movement. Someone or something was watching her. Instinct kicked in. Her fingers fumbled for the stone knife she kept tucked at her waist. She gripped it tight, the worn leather handle slick with blood. A shadow detached itself from the rocks. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a battered hat pulled low over sunburned features. His rifle was slung across his back, but his hands were empty, palms turned out to show he meant no harm. Tayan bared her teeth, the knife trembling in her hand. Trust was a dead thing, buried back where the settlers left her. The man crouched a few paces away, moving slow, deliberate. His voice was a rough scrape, like stone against stone. "You're hurt bad." She didn't answer. Words are dangerous things. "I ain't here to finish what they started," he said. "Name's Luke McGraw. Got a ranch few miles yonder." He nodded vaguely over the cliffs. "Saw you fall. Figured you might need help." Tayan's breath rattled in her lungs. She stared at him, trying to read the truth or the lie in his weathered face. The world tilted again. Her knife hand sagged. Luke made no move to come closer. He stayed where he was, crouched low, letting the silence stretch. "You can bleed out here, or you can let me help," he said finally. "Ain't no third choice." Tayan's vision dimmed further. Her body decided for her. The knife slipped from her fingers. Luke caught her before she hit the ground. The last thing Tayan remembered before the darkness claimed her was the scent of horses and leather and something unfamiliar. Hope, maybe, clinging stubbornly to the edge of ruin. Far above them, the vultures spiraled lower, disappointed, but not yet ready to give up their claim. The storm had been coming for a long time. Luke McGraw could feel it deep in his bones, the way old men claimed they could smell rain on the wind. But this storm wasn't born of clouds or thunder. It was the kind that tore up a man's life and left nothing but broken fence posts and burned-out houses in its wake. He worked quickly, carrying the Apache woman, Tayan. He thought he heard her mumble, toward the battered lean-to he still called home. Her blood soaked through his shirt, warm against the chill rising off the desert floor. She weighed almost nothing. Starvation and betrayal had carved her down to bone and sinew. She stirred once, a faint whimper escaping her lips, but she didn't wake. Luke kicked the door open with his boot. The ranch house was barely standing, patched holes in the walls, a roof that sagged like an old mare's back. He laid Tayan down on a rough-hewn cot and fetched a basin of water from the rain barrel outside. He worked silently, cleaning the wound, stitching torn flesh with hands more used to mending saddles than saving lives. As he stitched, memories came unbidden. Another woman, another night. Clara, hair like spun gold, lying in the dirt with blood bubbling at her lips. The settlers said it was an accident, a case of mistaken identity during a skirmish with a band of Apaches. But Luke had seen the truth in their eyes. Clara had spoken too often, too loudly, against the hatred simmering in town. And for that, they buried her under the same red dirt that had birthed their grudges. Luke tied off the thread with a savage jerk, cursing under his breath. He wasn't going to lose another one. Not this time. The woman didn't move. He watched her chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. A stubborn spark flickered in her even now, refusing to be snuffed out. Morning crept over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and angry reds. Luke sipped coffee, so bitter it could have stripped paint, sitting just inside the door with his rifle across his knees. He didn't expect thanks. Hell, he didn't even expect her to stay. If she had any sense, she'd bolt as soon as her legs would carry her. But sense had never ruled this land. Out here, life clung stubbornly to bad ideas and dying causes. A soft rustle from the cot made him glance over. Tayan's eyes were open, dark and wary. She sat up too fast and gasped, one hand flying to her side. "Easy," Luke said, voice low even. "You're safe." Her gaze flicked to the knife she'd dropped the night before. It lay on the floor, just out of reach. She tensed, ready to lunge. Luke set the rifle aside and raised both hands, palms out. "Ain't no enemy here." She hesitated, then sank back against the wall, exhausted beyond pride. "I fixed you up best I could," Luke said. "Bullet missed anything important." "Mostly." Tayan studied him like a hawk sizing up a snake. Suspicion rolled off her in waves. Luke wasn't surprised. He didn't look much like salvation. His clothes were patched and filthy, his beard scraggly, his boots worn thin at the soles. Life had whittled him down same as it had her. He fished a piece of jerky from his pocket and laid it on the rough table between them. Food, if you can keep it down. Tayan didn't move. Her eyes flicked between him and the door, measuring her odds. Luke didn't blame her. He'd spent the better part of the last year expecting betrayal from every quarter. Trust was a fool's currency, and he was near broke. The silence stretched thin between them. Luke leaned back against the wall, tipping his chair on two legs. Name's Luke McGraw. Used to run cattle through these parts. Not much left now. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters like skeletal fingers. Tayan's voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Why help? Luke shrugged, a slow roll of his shoulders. Oh, a debt. Figured maybe helping you squares it. She frowned, not understanding. Luke let the chair fall back on all four legs with a thud. He didn't explain. Some debts couldn't be paid with words. Outside, hoofbeats drummed against the earth. Dust kicked up along the ridge. Luke stood, grabbing the rifle, motioning Tayan down low. Her instincts were faster than his. She slid off the cot, landing silently on the floorboards. Voices carried on the wind, sharp, barking orders. Price's men, or others like them. Men who didn't much care whether the woman they hunted was guilty or not. Luke watched through the cracked window. 4 riders. Armed. Confident. They weren't looking to parley. He ducked back, heart pounding. Choices narrowed to a razor's edge. He could hand her over, save his own hide. Let the desert take another soul. It'd be easy. It was what the land expected of him. Survival at any cost. Or he could do the foolish thing. Luke set the rifle down and grabbed a battered quilt from a chest. He bundled Tayan inside it, disguising her slight frame as a pile of old bedding. She flinched when he touched her, but didn't fight. Stay still, he whispered. No matter what. The riders approached, spurs jingling, horses snorting in the dry air. A heavy knock rattled the door. Luke opened it slow, a neutral expression pasted on his face. Mornin'. The man in front, a lean rattlesnake of a fellow named Sam Wilkes, eyed him suspiciously. You seen anything strange? Apache woman runnin' loose. Luke scratched his chin thoughtfully. Ain't seen nobody but the vultures. Wilkes's gaze flicked past him into the house. Luke shifted his body subtly, blocking the view. We're search in every house, every shed. Orders from Price himself. Luke spat into the dirt. Ain't much to search here but broken dreams. Wilkes sneered. Watch your mouth, McGraw. You ain't exactly high on anyone's list of friends these days. Luke smiled without humor. Guess that makes 2 of us. Wilkes stared him down a moment longer, then jerked the reins, turning his horse away. The others followed, grumbling. Luke shut the door and bolted it, sagging against the frame. Tayan uncurled from the quilt, her face pale but composed. You lied, she said, wonder threading her voice. Luke shook his head. Didn't lie. Didn't tell him everything, neither. Trust flickered between them like a hesitant flame. Fragile. Dangerous. You can't stay here, Luke said. They'll be back. In greater numbers. Tayan nodded once, grim understanding in her eyes. Luke crossed the room and knelt beside an old chest. He pried it open, revealing worn saddlebags, a battered canteen, a map so tattered it was barely legible. Supplies for running. Supplies he never thought he'd use again. He glanced back at her. You ride. Tayan managed a faint smile. Better than most. Luke smiled too, despite himself. Maybe, just maybe, the storm could be weathered. Outside, the wind shifted. The scent of rain hung heavy on the air, thick with promise and peril alike. And somewhere beyond the horizon, destiny waited with bared teeth. The mare stumbled on a loose stone, nearly sending Tayan and Luke tumbling into the ravine below. Luke tightened the reins, muscles burning as he fought to steady her. Behind them, the wind carried the faint but certain sound of hooves. More riders, more trouble. Tayan crouched low against the horse's neck, one hand gripping Luke's belt to stay mounted. Her face was a grim mask, eyes scanning the ridges and gullies for any sign of shelter or ambush. They had been running for hours, dodging patrols, doubling back across dry creek beds to mask their trail. But blood called to blood, and Tane's wound still wept into the sand. A breadcrumb trail for the men behind them. Luke cursed under his breath. They were running out of time, running out of land. "We need higher ground," Tane said, voice rough but steady. Luke nodded and kicked the mare into a desperate climb toward the distant cliffs. The beast whinnied in protest, but obeyed, scrambling up the scree with frantic hooves. At the top, the world unfurled below them. Endless desert, broken mesas, scrub brush twisting under the brutal sun. And there, to the south, the glint of a riverbed. Dry this time of year, but the stone might confuse their trackers. Luke pointed. "There. We cut across, lose em in the canyon." Tane slid down first, nimble despite her injury. Luke followed, leading the horse by the bridle, each step sending small avalanches of pebbles skittering into the void. Behind them, a rifle cracked. A bullet kicked up dust inches from Luke's boot. No time for careful steps now. They plunged into the ravine, hooves clattering against stone, every breath a prayer. Tane stumbled once, and Luke caught her by the arm, hauling her upright without slowing. The canyon walls swallowed them, narrow and winding. Shadows deepened, the air cooled. They threaded through the maze until even the sound of pursuit faded. Luke finally pulled the mare to a halt under a rocky overhang. He turned to Tane, chest heaving. "You all right?" She nodded, wiping blood from her brow where a thorn had scored her skin. Luke fished a battered canteen from his saddlebag and handed it to her. She drank sparingly, handing it back without a word. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of unspoken truths. Luke broke it first. "Won't hold them long. Sooner or later, they'll find the trail again." Tane leaned against the canyon wall, the exhaustion plain on her face. "They'll never stop." Luke looked away, jaw clenched. He knew the truth of it. Men like Price didn't forgive or forget. Blood demanded more blood. Suffering was a kind of... He knelt beside a patch of sand and began drawing rough lines with a stick, sketching out the canyon's twists and exits. Tane crouched beside him, studying it. "Here," she said, tapping a narrow defile. "They won't expect us to double back." Luke grinned, a flash of white in his dust-streaked face. "Smart." They moved quickly, retracing part of their path under the cover of shadows. Every step was measured, deliberate. Tane moved like a ghost, silent and sure despite her injury. Still, Luke watched her out of the corner of his eye, worry gnawing at him. She was running on anger and adrenaline, and both were burning low. They found shelter beneath a broken arch of stone, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. Luke unsaddled the mare and set her to graze on a stubborn patch of weeds. Tane sank to the ground, shivering despite the heat. Luke shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You should rest," he said. She shook her head. "No time." Luke crouched in front of her, searching her face. "You won't help nobody dead." For a moment, he thought she might argue. Then her shoulders sagged, and she nodded. Luke built a small fire, careful to shield it from the canyon mouth. As it crackled to life, Tane's defenses seemed to crumble along with it. "I had a brother," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "Koenna. He was a fighter. Brave. Too brave." Luke didn't speak. He knew the weight of memories too well to rush them. "They said there would be peace," she continued. "Talks. Promises. Koenna didn't trust them. He said the white men would smile with their mouths and kill with their hands." She fell silent, the fire painting sorrow across her face. "They killed him during the talks," she said finally. "Said he reached for a weapon. He didn't. He only reached for his necklace. A gift from our mother." Luke felt something twist deep inside him. The same sickness he had felt when Clara fell. The cold, hollow certainty that justice was just another word, empty and broken. "I'm sorry," he said, the words too small but all he had. Tane shrugged the coat tighter around her. "Sorry doesn't bring him back." Luke tossed another branch onto the fire, sparks leaping into the night. He wanted to say more, to offer something better. But he had no lies left to give. The mare snorted suddenly, ears pricking. Luke stiffened, hand flying to his rifle. Tayan rose silently, knife in hand. They waited, breath held, listening. Hoofbeats. Closer now, echoing down the canyon walls. Luke doused the fire with a bootful of sand. Darkness swallowed them whole. They pressed back into the shadows as 3 riders emerged into the canyon mouth. Torches flared, casting monstrous shadows against the stone. Luke recognized one of them, Wilkes, the sneering bastard who had come sniffing around his ranch. The others were cut from the same mold. Hard-eyed mean. They doubled back, Tayan whispered. Luke's mind raced. They couldn't outrun horses in this terrain. Fight, and they'd be cut down. Or use the land itself. He grabbed Tayan's arm and pulled her toward a narrow crevice in the rock wall. They squeezed through just as the riders passed, the torchlight brushing the stone not 3 feet from where they hid. One wrong move, one cough, and it was over. The horses clopped past, and for a heartbeat, Luke thought they might be safe. Then a shout rang out. Blood trail. Wilkes had found a smear of crimson on the rocks. The riders spurred forward, following it. Luke exhaled slowly. We need to move. Now. Tayan nodded, face set in grim determination. They crept deeper into the maze of stone, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. But Luke knew it was only a matter of time. At the canyon's far edge, they stumbled onto an old game trail. Narrow, treacherous, but it led up into the high country where the scrub grew thick and the stones told no tales. Luke hesitated at the foot of the trail, glancing back toward the desert. Past here, he said, there's no turning back. Tayan met his gaze, something fierce and unbroken in her eyes. I have nothing left to turn back to, she said. Neither did he. They climbed, hands and knees at times, the stars wheeling overhead like silent witnesses. Each step carried them further from the world they knew, into a future written not in treaties or promises, but in blood and dust and will. At the top, Luke paused to catch his breath. Below them, the desert stretched wide and merciless, a graveyard for dreams. He looked at Tayan, silhouetted against the night sky, battered but unbowed. A new thought struck him, fierce and sudden. Maybe some dreams weren't meant to die, after all. A torch flared in the canyon below, a distant glow, but it was fading, swallowed by the dark. Luke tightened his grip on the reins and led the way down the far side. The blood trail ended here. But their story had only just begun. The wind smelled of ash and thunder. Luke crouched beside a twisted juniper, rifle across his lap, scanning the horizon. Below him, the scrublands baked under a pitiless sun. Dust clouds spiraled up where Wilkes and the others fanned out, searching, hunting. It wouldn't be long now. Beside him, Tayan tightened the bandage around her side and rose slowly, knife in hand. Her face was a mask of determination, the pain buried deep, invisible to anyone who might mistake her for weak. They had ridden hard through the night, every mile pushing them closer to the Badlands, where few dared follow. Luke knew this stretch of country like the lines etched into his palms. It was wild, broken ground, dangerous to the careless, deadly to the arrogant. Today, it would be their ally. Luke nodded toward the bluff overlooking the narrow pass. There, he said. Bottleneck. We can hold them off. Tayan studied the ground, her dark eyes calculating. They'll have numbers. Luke gave a grim smile. Then we'll have to make every shot count. They worked fast, stacking stones into rough cover, setting traps with wire and brush. Luke rigged his last stick of dynamite to a hollow log, a relic from his ranching days when blasting stubborn stumps was the only way forward. As they set the last snare, Luke caught Tayan staring off into the distance, her face unreadable. Regrets, he asked. She shook her head. Only that it ends here, instead of beginning. Luke felt the weight of her words settle over him. Not just survival, not just revenge. She was thinking of something bigger, a future neither of them had dared imagine. He loaded his rifle carefully, hands steady. Maybe it's both. The first riders appeared on the ridge, black against the burning sky. Shouts rang out, and the chase resumed. Luke squeezed Tayan's shoulder once, silent promise, and then took his position. The gunfire started sharp and sudden. Luke dropped the first rider cleanly, the man pitching sideways off his horse. Tayan's knife sang through the air, finding its mark in another. The traps worked better than Luke had dared hope. One horse reared, screaming, as its legs snapped in a hidden snare, throwing its rider into the dust. But there were too many. Wilkes led the charge himself, roaring curses, his face twisted with rage. He carried a shotgun across his pommel, scanning the rocks with Luke sighted down his rifle, breath steady, finger light on the trigger. One shot. Two. A third missed wide as Wilkes ducked low. The settlers dismounted, spreading out, rifles at the ready. The air filled with the crack and whine of bullets. Stone chipped and shattered around them, a deadly rain. Tayan moved like smoke, weaving between the rocks, drawing their fire, leading them into the kill zones. Luke dropped two more men before the rifle clicked dry. He ducked down, slamming fresh rounds into the chamber. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him half around. He bit back a cry, forced himself upright. Tayan was pinned near a boulder, three men closing fast. Luke didn't think. He moved. He fired once, twice, dropping two of them. The third lunged for Tayan, knife flashing. Tayan met him head-on, twisting low, driving her blade up under his ribs. The man gasped, staggered, and fell. The fight pressed tighter, closer. No more long shots. Now it was grit and blood and fury. Wilkes came for Luke like a storm, shotgun roaring. Luke dove sideways, the blast tearing a hole where he had stood a heartbeat before. They grappled in the dust, fists and boots and curses. Wilkes was strong, fueled by rage, but Luke fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Wilkes drove a fist into Luke's wounded shoulder. Pain exploded white behind Luke's eyes. Wilkes grinned, teeth bloody. Should have stayed dead with the rest of McGraw. Luke spat blood and drove his knee into Wilkes' gut. The man staggered, and Luke grabbed the shotgun, wrenching it away. One brutal swing, and Wilkes crumpled, unconscious or dead. Luke didn't care which. He turned, searching frantically for Tayan. She was down, blood soaking the dust around her. Luke's heart stopped. Tayan. He stumbled toward her, dropping to his knees. Her eyes fluttered open at his touch. "I'm here," he said hoarsely. "I'm here." She smiled, small and fierce. "You came back. Always." Footsteps pounded the ground behind him. Luke turned, raising the shotgun, but it was too slow. A gunshot cracked. The settler behind him dropped, face first, into the dust. Luke spun to see a figure standing on the ridge, an old Apache warrior, bow in hand, more shadows moving behind him. Tayan's people. Those who had survived, who had heard the call. Reinforcements. Relief and disbelief tangled in Luke's chest. The settlers, leaderless and battered, broke and ran, disappearing into the wastelands they had so long sought to tame. The battle was over. Luke turned back to Tayan, cradling her against him. She was pale, too pale. He pressed a hand to her side, trying to staunch the bleeding. "You stay with me," he whispered. "You hear?" She nodded weakly. Not finished yet. Luke helped her up, bracing her weight against his own. The Apache warriors surrounded them, some nodding, others simply watching with grave eyes. One, a man with silver hair and a necklace of beads, stepped forward. "You fought with her," he said. Luke met his gaze without flinching. "She fought for all of us." The old man studied him a moment longer, then nodded. They moved together into the rising sun, wounded but alive, the echoes of gunfire fading behind them. Days later, when the worst of the wounds had closed and the first shelter had been built from stone and sweat, Luke stood at the edge of the new settlement, watching the children chase lizards through the dust. Tayan leaned against the doorway of the crude house they shared, arms folded, a rare smile on her lips. "You still think it's foolish?" she asked. Luke shook his head. "No, not foolish. Necessary." They were building something more than just shelter here, more than safety. A place where the old scars could fade, if not heal. A place where promises weren't just empty words. He walked back to her, the boards creaking under his boots. She reached out and took his hand without hesitation. They stood there a long moment, two survivors in a land that had tried to kill them and failed. Luke looked at the sky, bright and boundless overhead. Maybe this was what Clara had dreamed of in her secret heart. Maybe this was the future she had fought for, even if she hadn't lived to see it. The past could not be undone. Blood had been spilled, and ghosts would haunt these sands for generations. But seeds had been planted too, seeds watered with sacrifice, with courage, with hope. Luke squeezed Tayan's hand gently. "Ready to build something better?" he asked. She smiled, a fierce and beautiful thing. "Always." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. And for the first time in a long, long while, Luke McGraw believed that maybe, just maybe, the desert could bloom. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The wind had a voice that morning, not loud, but old. It sighed through the brittle slats of the wooden buildings, like it had seen everything, and had no strength left to argue. The sky hung low over dry river crossing, pale as spilled milk, and the dirt road through town was dusted with a ghost-colored memory of horses long gone. She stood barefoot on the rough boards of the jailhouse porch, wrists bound in iron. Clara Whitmore, hair the shade of molasses pulled into a careless braid, cheeks hollowed by days without supper, and a stillness in her that made people nervous. Not the trembling kind. The sort that looked like stone had learned to breathe. They called her Trouble. Witch-born. Fire-fated. She had once been the town's gentle flower, daughter of a homesteader with hands like fiddle strings and eyes that laughed easily. But that was before the sickness took her mother, before the flames took their barn and left her father's body curled into ash beside the horses. She'd been 17 then, all cracked voice and soot-scabbed fingers, trying to hold together what no one offered to help fix. And when she fell behind on land dues, she made the mistake of asking Sheriff Barden for mercy. That was how he set his sights on her, a powerful man used to women folding under the pressure of his grin. But Clara had thanked him and walked away, dignity held like a thorn-pricked rose in her palm. He never forgave her for that. Now she waited for auction, the public sale of a human soul dressed in calico and shame. The sheriff called it repayment. The town called it unfortunate but legal. But Clara, she called it Tuesday. Another page in a story she hadn't agreed to write. The boy came again, Elias, no more than 10, with one sleeve shorter than the other, and a heart that hadn't yet learned to look away. He crept up like a whisper and held out a tin cup of water. She didn't speak, just knelt slightly and took it slow, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. "They're saying someone from Lakota camps is here," he whispered, glancing back at the hitch post where a painted pony now waited, dust on its hooves like frost. Clara looked, but the jail's bars made vision crooked. Still she saw him, a man alone. No posse, no fuss. Just leather-wrapped silence, and eyes that didn't flicker when people stared. He stood across the street, unmoving, as if he had always been there. "Wicasa." The sheriff's voice cut through the moment, like a blade scraping bone. "Back from the creek. Girl? Good. You'll want to look presentable for your big day." Clara straightened without a word. That silence of hers, it was like thunder held in a teacup. Sheriff Barden was a broad man with a paunch fed on other people's misfortunes. He wore his badge like a weapon and smiled like a wolf too lazy to hide its teeth. He had once tried to court her with sweet corn and coin. Now he paraded her as debt made flesh. He lifted her chin with the butt of his rifle. "Think anyone will pay more than 2 bits for used goods like you?" She did not flinch. His smile soured. He turned to spit but paused, eyes narrowing toward the man beneath the awning of the mercantile. Wicasa hadn't moved, not even to blink. The sheriff's mouth twisted. Savages don't have pockets. The Lakota warrior did not answer, nor look away. By midday, the platform was near complete. 2 of the blacksmith's boys nailed down the last board while their father argued with the preacher about whether this counted as biblical restitution. No one asked Clara what she believed. They only warned her not to resist. "Think of it like marrying someone with paperwork," chuckled one of the deputies. She did not answer. That night, they locked her back into the holding room, a place once used for drunkards and dying coyotes. Clara traced shapes into the wooden wall with a fingernail. A sun, a bluebell, the curve of a horse's mane. Her father used to say that if you could draw it from memory, it still belonged to you. She heard a sound, a breath more than a footstep. At the corner of the cell window, the warrior's silhouette appeared, framed by stars and the restless shuffle of trees beyond town. He didn't speak. He simply placed something through the bars, a folded cloth, weathered but clean, and a small strip of dried meat. Then he vanished into the hush. Clara sat for a long time with the cloth in her lap. It smelled of smoke and pine sap, and the stitching was old, hand-done. There was nothing romantic about it. No gesture of heroism. Just quiet humanity freely given. She tucked it beneath her shoulder like a bomb. By morning, the wind had changed direction. The auction would begin at noon. The platform groaned under the weight of curious bodies. The banker, the blacksmith, the widows who once gave Clara sugar cubes in church. Sheriff Barton stood tall, boots polished and voice like tar. He read from a paper that rattled more than he did, spoke of debts and disorder, of fines unpaid and laws misunderstood. When he said her name, he paused, just enough to remind them she had once been lovely. Clara Whitmore. Auctioned by legal order of the Dry River Crossing Municipality. Starting bid $4. She stood straight. The sun behind her wove gold through the dust in her hair. She wore the cloth the warrior had given her, tied at her wrist like a ribbon of belonging. The crowd rustled. No one moved. Then, from the back, boots on the boardwalk. Slow, purposeful. Wicasa stepped forward. Not fast, not with fire. Just the way rivers do when they choose their path. Inevitable. The sheriff's hand hovered near his revolver. Don't be foolish. But the warrior kept walking. Clara didn't breathe. And just before he reached the edge of the crowd, he stopped. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He looked at her, not with pity, nor hunger, nor savior's pride, but like she was a name he had been carrying too long without a face. Clara's lips parted just slightly. Not from fear, from recognition. Somewhere in that space between her heartbeat and the hush of the crowd, something shifted. She was no longer alone. The sheriff broke the spell. "Get back," he barked. "This ain't your concern." But no one laughed with him. No one jeered. Even the preacher said nothing. And somewhere on the far edge of town, the chapel bell rang. Just once. A sound like a door unlocking. Clara looked at the crowd. Then at the man who had watched her not like a hawk, but a brother of the storm. And then, gently, she sat down at the edge of the platform, wrists still bound, but head held high. The auction had not ended, but something else had begun. And in the eyes of those who noticed, the wind no longer sounded tired. It sounded like a promise. The wind had carried his name longer than he had. Long before white tongues twisted it into syllables they could tolerate, he had simply been Wicasa, which in his grandmother's voice had meant more than warrior. It had meant listener, root holder, one who waits until the silence gives way. He had not come to Dry River Crossing for Clara Whitmore. Not at first. The whisper reached him through a merchant's caravan, a girl being auctioned like cattle, her debt sold like winter pelts. He did not believe it at first. White towns had many strange rituals, but this tasted of something older, crueler, something his people had once endured beneath iron stars and broken treaties. Still he came, not with fury, with eyes open. He watched from the woods that first night. The town breathed like a wounded animal, loud in its sleep, uneasy in its bones. He made no fire, slept beneath trees that remembered things men no longer spoke of. By dawn, he rode in like shadow, left his horse tied beneath the cottonwood near the mercantile. No badge, no weapon shown, just himself, quiet, unreadable, and wrapped in patience. The girl was thinner than rumor, not fragile, though. Her body looked as if it had been carved down by grief, not defeat. Her eyes were the color of prairie storms, and when she looked up, he saw not a plea, but a mirror. They did not speak. Not yet. Some truths don't require sound. He watched her as she drank the water from the boy, watched her give thanks without words. She moved like someone who had learned not to ask for kindness because it often came wrapped in cost. And yet, when the boy smiled at her, something in her softened. Barely. A thaw beneath snow. Wakasa turned before the sheriff stepped forward, not because he feared him, but because he knew poison when it came clothed in law. That evening, he sat near the edge of town, on the rise of a low hill. He carved lines into a strip of leather, not to pass time, to remember. His sister, Tanila, had once been bartered for grain. The men who called themselves righteous had claimed it was salvation. She had been 12. He never found her. That scar lived beneath his ribs, not angry, just unfinished. Clara reminded him of her, though not in the obvious ways. Tanila had been all firelight and laughter, curious even in chains. Clara was stone and thunder, still, unyielding, but something in their quiet, in the way they disappeared from the world around them, echoed the same music. That night, he returned to the jail and left the cloth and the meat. A gesture, not a rescue, of witness. She accepted it without protest. He did not return to the hill that time. Instead, he waited nearby, listened to the way the town spoke of her, some with venom, some with shame, but none with truth. The woman they described wicked, defiant, cursed, did not match the one who sat cross-legged in her cell, drawing wild flowers on the wood like they were spells to keep her heart from vanishing. The sheriff drank that night, loud, careless, bragged at the saloon that no one would dare outbid him, called her his property, laughing like a man who had never been told no and survived it. Wakasa didn't drink. He left the saloon before someone tested his silence. Morning came slow. The auction would be the next day. He walked the edges of town, found the preacher alone, sweeping dust from the chapel door. "You believe in mercy?" he asked. The preacher paused, squinted at him through sunlight. "Only if it costs something," he said. Wakasa nodded once and walked on. Later, he passed the innkeeper, the older woman with soft hands and tired shoulders. Mrs. Finch. She didn't flinch when she saw him. "You've been watching her," she said. He didn't deny it. "She used to hum while she swept my steps," the woman added. "Now she just listens for the next cruelty." He looked at the window above the inn. The curtain fluttered. No one behind it. "I think you see her," the woman said. "I think she sees me," he replied. That night, beneath a sky full of stories, he sat by the cottonwood again. He unwrapped the pipe, the one his father had smoked in council. The one passed through generations, never lit, without purpose. The one that was never traded, never given, unless the cause was sacred. He didn't know yet what he would do, but the air felt different, heavy, ready. He dreamed of rivers, of a girl standing in water, unchained, sunlight caught in her palms. When he woke, his jaw ached with the memory of his own stillness. Auction day. The crowd gathered early, buzzing like flies around meat. Most came not to buy, but to watch. A spectacle, tragedy softened by distance. Clara stood with her wrists bound, but her spine straight. That ribbon of cloth, his cloth, wrapped around her wrist like a vow. He stepped forward when the time came. The world narrowed to footsteps. Went beneath his boots, dust curling at his ankles. Every eye on him like arrows. He walked until silence swallowed the square. Then he stopped. The sheriff's voice cracked first. A threat masked as law, but it rang hollow in the quiet. Wakasa said nothing. He did not need to. Clara looked at him then, truly looked. Not just the surface of him. The stories, the stillness, the cost. And she saw. She saw. In that gaze, there was no rescue, no romance, no firebrand rebellion. There was only this. Someone who did not look away. The sheriff stepped down from a platform, hand near his revolver. "You think she's yours now?" Wakasa's answer came not in speech, but movement. He reached into the satchel tied at his waist and pulled out the pipe. Not lit, not raised, just shone. Every elder in the town knew what it meant. The offering of a pipe was not barter. It was bond, sacred, binding. Not for gold, not for land, for life. for protection, for peace. The air went still. The sheriff faltered. Even the preacher stepped forward, voice thin. This can't be refused. It would dishonor every treaty ever signed. The silence deepened. Clara exhaled once, the first sound she'd made that day. It was not a sob. It was not relief. It was the sound of something unbreaking. And then, gently, without being told, she stepped from a platform. The chains still bound her wrists, but her step was free. She walked until she stood beside him. Not behind, beside. He didn't reach for her. He didn't move. He just stood, a shadow with a spine, a witness with a soul. And she nodded. Only once. Then they turned together, and the crowd parted like wheat. Behind them, the sheriff stood still, teeth grinding on defeat he could not name. Clara did not look back. The chapel bell rang again. Just once. A sound like an answer. Ahead, the wind stirred the long grass. And in its breath was a question neither had yet spoken, not out loud. Where do we go now? But the wind already knew. Forward. The days that followed were hushed and half-lit, as though the sun itself had paused in the sky to see what would become of them. Clara did not ride behind him. She walked at first. Her ankles blistered in silence, but she did not complain. Wicasa never asked her to speak. He simply matched her pace, his painted pony walking beside them like a sentinel. Where she stumbled, he steadied, not with arms, but presence. There are rescues more powerful than touch. They made camp 3 nights out, under the bones of a cottonwood struck by lightning years before. The air smelled of sage and ash. Clara sat cross-legged by the fire, watching its light-stitched shadows across Wicasa's face. His expression did not soften or darken. It simply was. Like stone smoothed by time. She finally asked what he was doing the day he stood before the crowd. He looked at the flames, then at the stars, and answered only, "Something my father would have done." She did not pry further. Something in the stillness between them did the talking. She did not feel owed an explanation. She was only trying to understand the shape of the man who had turned the wind that day. In her sleep, she dreamed of the auction platform burning, not as revenge, as cleansing. By the 5th day, they reached a narrow stream lined with willows. Wicasa showed her how to set snares, how to watch for movement beneath the brush. Clara was clumsy with it. Her hands remembered sewing, not survival. But she tried, and he noticed. When they caught their first rabbit, she held it with a stillness that echoed her own past, not grief, but reverence. She whispered a thank you to the creature before giving it over. Wicasa did not laugh, nor nod. He simply prepared it with the same gentleness. That night, she sat beside the fire with charcoal on her fingertips. She traced again the shape of a bluebell on a flat stone, just as she had scratched it into the cell wall days before. This time it was not a memory. It was a becoming. He watched her work, the faint curl of a smile tugging one corner of his mouth, but not rising. Some smiles live deeper than lips. "You draw to remember?" he asked. "I draw to know I'm still here." A pause. "I watch the wind for the same reason." They did not need more than that. The next day, they reached a Lakota outpost, small, respectful, wrapped in laughter and smoke. Women glanced at Clara, without surprise, only curiosity. A child ran to greet Wicasa, threw himself against the warrior's knees. Clara learned his name was Tawa, nephew, not son. The child stared at her, wide-eyed, then offered her a smooth stone. She took it. A gift, not a test. For 3 nights, she lived among those who did not speak her tongue, but somehow understood her silence. One woman, older than time, braided Clara's hair without permission or explanation, humming as she worked. When she was done, she placed a small shell against Clara's temple and whispered something that sounded like still water. Wicasa spoke little during those days. He carved, repaired leather, listened. He did not offer her to them, nor explain her presence. He simply made space for her to exist without interrogation. On the morning of the 4th day, word arrived on the wind, a rider breathless, carrying the stink of fear. Sheriff Barton was coming. Not alone. 2 bounty men rode with him. Legal men, armed with writs and disdain. Word had traveled fast. Clara had been taken, they said. Not rescued. Stolen. She stood still as ice when she heard. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was, of course, because cruelty rarely accepts its own ending. Wakasa did not pace or panic. He simply packed. "We can run," she said, voice low. "No," he said. "We move forward." "Then I'll fight," she whispered, surprised by herself. He paused, looked at her with a depth that almost undid her. "No," he said again gently. "You will be seen." He offered her a talisman, a narrow piece of polished bone wrapped in rawhide, feathers and small beads tied to its end. She held it as if it might burn, but it only hummed. "This is for strength," he said. "And what about fear?" "That too." She nodded, wore it close to her heart. They left the camp before sunrise. The air was thick with meaning, and even the birds held their songs. They followed no roads, just instinct and memory. By dusk, the edge of Dry River came into view once more, faint rooftops etched against a twilight sky. Clara's feet bled again, but she did not stop. The platform was still there, waiting like a ghost. Word had already returned ahead of them. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains, eyes flicking like moths. The preacher stood near the church, his collar loose. Mrs. Finch waited at the inn's edge, arms folded. Elias was not seen. Clara walked ahead of Wakasa. She wore no ribbon, no chains, no disguise. The sheriff arrived within the hour. Dust trailed behind his horse like smoke. His voice was the same as always, loud, slick, too practiced to feel real. "You'll come with me," he said. "She's property of this county. There's a law." Clara did not flinch. She stepped forward and placed the talisman into the dust between them. "She's not yours," said the preacher, surprising them all. Barden spun. "You stay out of this, old man." Mrs. Finch moved next. "She is no one's debt, and no longer yours to shame." The townspeople murmured. The crowd swelled. Something unseen moved through them, not revolution, but reckoning. Wakasa stepped to Clara's side. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked. "There are no chains," he said. "Not unless you bring them." Sheriff Barden hesitated. For the first time, he looked like a man who understood he had already lost. He turned his horse, spitting into the dust, but said nothing more. No gunfire, no blood, just the sound of hooves, fading. Clara stood there, the air thick with a kind of peace that tasted like smoke and salt. Her hands trembled once, then stilled. She did not cry. Wakasa handed her the talisman again. She tied it to her wrist. That night, the wind curled through town like a blessing. It carried no storm, no sand, no warning, only the soft scent of wood smoke, and the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The dawn came slow, as if reluctant to wake the world. A thin veil of silver clung to the horizon, the kind of light that made everything look suspended, neither day nor night, just breath held. The town of Dry River Crossing sat hushed beneath it, shutters drawn and boots absent from the boardwalks, as if the ground itself had grown tired of carrying fear. Clara stood beneath the twisted bones of the cottonwood, facing the road that once led her in chains. She wore a dress the color of cream and dust, gifted by Mrs. Finch the night before, once stitched for a daughter who never came home. Her hair had been braided back by her own hands, slow and steady, like winding rope before a climb. The talisman rested against her collarbone, swinging slightly with each breath. She hadn't taken it off since Wakasa gave it to her. Not once. Today, there would be no auction, but there would be a reckoning. Sheriff Barden was returning, not with law behind him, that had failed, but with force and fury, and the kind of pride that could not bear to lose control. He would not come to talk. He would come to end the conversation. Clara knew this. She had felt it in the soil, in the way the birds had not sung that morning, in the stillness of the wind. Wakasa stood to her left, near enough to protect, far enough to honor. He had said little since they returned. He didn't need to. The strength he carried was no longer just his own. It was shared now, braided into the days they had lived quietly together, in snares and drawings and fire-watch silences. but today would ask more of them than silence. The crowd began to gather slowly, like the tide creeping back into a dry riverbed. Not jeering, not cruel, just watching, unsure, curious whether the old rules still held. Mrs. Finch came first, pressing a warm hand into Clara's. Then the preacher, spine straighter than before, eyes clear. One by one, the townspeople filled in, not shouting support, but showing up, and sometimes that's more powerful. Then the sound. Hoofbeats. Like hammers on the heart. 3 horses, thick with foam. Sheriff Barden rode at the front, his coat dark, his mouth twisted in a smile too wide to be real. Behind him, 2 bounty men, one with a rifle strapped across his back, the other scanning the crowd like he expected betrayal to look familiar. Clara didn't move. Her hands stayed folded in front of her. Her voice stayed silent. Wakasa stepped forward, not to block her, but to meet the gaze of the man who had tried to buy her, own her, destroy her. "This ends here," Barden called out, dismounting. "You bring her back now, and I'll forget what you've done." His boots struck the ground like threats. His words were meant to echo. They didn't. Clara stepped forward. "No," she said, and her voice was low but sharp as flint. "You don't get to write the end of me." Barden laughed, short and ugly. "You think standing next to one savage makes you free?" She turned her gaze to him, not fierce, but clear. Her strength was not in heat, but in the calm of someone who had already burned. "I was never yours," she said. "Not when you made the deal. Not when you dragged me in front of them. Not now." He moved his hand toward his hip, not fast enough to be brave, not slow enough to be harmless. The preacher stepped forward. "There are no chains here," he said, voice like gravel and gospel. Barden froze. And then the rifleman twitched. Just enough. But Wakasa was already moving. Not wild. Not loud. Like lightning without thunder. His hand met the rifle barrel before the man could aim. A twist, a blow. The gun clattered to the dirt. The second bounty hunter reached for his pistol, but found it taken from his holster by Elias, who had crept up unseen from the alley, small and sure. The boy held it high, hands shaking, eyes wet but burning. "Leave her be," he shouted. "You leave her be." The wind stopped then, completely, as if the world needed to witness what came next in stillness. Barden looked around, saw no allies, saw no fear in the eyes he had once commanded. He saw Clara, her head high, her soul unhidden, and he understood, too late, that she had never been his to hurt. His lip curled. "She's marked. You all see it. She's cursed." The old woman who had braided Clara's hair stepped from the crowd. "She is not cursed," she said. "She is chosen." Barden backed toward his horse. "I'll be back," he said, but the threat hung hollow. No one believed him anymore. Not even his men. He mounted, turned, rode out. No one followed. The moment held, suspended in breath. Then Clara exhaled. Wakasa turned to her, eyes searching. She nodded once. "I am not afraid." He said nothing. He only placed his hand over her heart, just once, and stepped back. The townspeople did not cheer. They did not weep. They simply stood with her. That night, the chapel bell rang again. But not for judgment. For freedom. Wakasa and Clara walked past the auction block for the last time. Its wood was splintering. Now, the platform cracked. It would not stand another season. She did not look back. They left Dry River crossing beneath stars that blinked like soft lanterns in the sky. No path. No plan. Just forward. At the edge of the prairie, the wind picked up again. Not wild. Not cold. Just a quiet voice, steady and warm. And if you had been standing there, just beside them, you might have heard it say, "The story doesn't end here. It begins."